Hello, everyone. I'm back, integrating real perspective. And today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Flightplan with Jodie Foster from 2005. So I've always been a fan of Jodie Foster, but I didn't get around to watching this movie until last summer. Now, I love Jodie Foster with a passion. If there was ever an actress who should be awarded with the most beautiful eyes and facial geometry, it's definitely her, without a doubt. So I watched Contact back in 2019, and I had seen that movie in theaters when it was first released. She was actually really phenomenal in that one. And being a Carl Sagan fan, I'm still taken by how that film is imbued with his spirit since he passed away the year before the film came out. And it's actually based on the book of the same name. So there's a really vivid, almost dreamlike state that's induced by watching Flight Plan. And James Horner's music in particular adds a beautiful background ambience that's equal parts beautiful and disorienting. I love it. In fact, one of the highlights for me was the closing credits to that film, which features a 3D CGI simulation of an airplane and the camera just drifting in and out of different areas of the plane. It's very, very fluid. It's just got such a nice flow to it, and you don't know where you're going to end up next. And then by the very end, the camera just pulls out, and you see the view of the airplane from above. It's very elegantly designed. And then, like the credits are just kind of like shifting, either, angling off to the left or angling off to the right, just to give you an idea of this whole movie as being like one shifting hall of mirrors, basically. Yeah, which I'm going to get into in just a little bit. So here's the plot device that I picked up from watching this movie. Yeah, it's essentially about gaslighting. So here's the layout. So Foster plays Kyle Pratt, an aircraft designer who is going home to the United States from Berlin with her dead husband on board in his casket. Along with her daughter Julia, they plan to attend his funeral in Long Island. Turns out that Julia has never actually been to the States, and I guess she was born in Berlin. Her and her husband had a baby while they were there. Thing is, though, is that I know a lot about Jodie Foster's character, but I am not given any sort of character profile on the husband at all, except that he died by falling to his death from a great height, and that he was an unhappy man, and that's it. I mean, the opening few minutes of the film while the credits are playing just shows Kyle um, at the morgue and her husband being put into a casket. I mean, there's really not much else I can say about those opening few minutes, but what is essential to the story here, what drives the story forward is Kyle's daughter Julia, who mysteriously disappears shortly after their flight takes off, and after Kyle wakes up from a nap. And that's just 20 minutes into the film. So then there's the air marshal Gene Carson, played by Peter Sarsgaard. What do you know? I remember that guy from Garden State, a movie that I actually saw shortly after it came out. Now, Gene Carson seems like this unassuming type who is just trying to keep the peace on the plane as Kyle starts searching for her daughter, creating a thick air of anxiety amongst the 400 plus passengers on the plane. And for the next 40 minutes or so, Carson is watching her, trying to contain her behavior and make sure that she doesn't start attacking random passengers or causing any sort of erratic episodes. Um, and then there's Sean Bean. Love Sean Bean. Oh boy. When you know that Sean Bean is going to be in a movie, it's going to be good. It's going to be worth watching. Like 5-star approval right there. So Sean Bean, he plays Captain Rich, who starts out really frustrated and unsure on how to help Kyle. Well, during this time, he's claiming that there's no record of Julia ever having boarded on the plane. You know, even when he has his crew, all the flight attendants, doing a thorough search of the plane, from tail to nose and from nose to tail, uh, no matter how thorough they are, and it's a search that seems to last for hours, he announces to her that he received an autopsy report on Julia's death and that she apparently died when Kyle's husband actually jumped off the roof. He jumped off the roof and took her with. There's actually a really, really like mind fucking scene where Kyle is standing in the middle of this circle of air attendants and the pilot, and she's like, you see this close up of her pupil, and instead of the iris of her eye, you see like an entire scene of the um like a bird's eye view of, I think it's her or her husband. It's her walking out of her hotel, and I don't know, like the iris seems to be blotting out, like as in literally creating a blind spot where we're not able to see what she's not able to see. That essentially, like, her daughter right now is just drawing this question mark, like, really? No, 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 no. My husband could not have jumped off and brought and took my daughter with. No, she would not have died that way. She's not even dead at all, period. No, none of this makes sense at all to the flustered and desperate Kyle. And then she starts going to extremes, taking matters into her own hands. Um, uh, you know, all the while she's trying to piece a narrative together on why anyone would kidnap her daughter. It's not like Julia just wandered off. She's actually been kidnapped. Not merely missing. Not merely missing. Kyle even takes notice of a couple of Arab passengers. A wink, wink, that this movie came out after 9/11, and this movie was evoking the terror of being on an airplane after, in a post 9/11 world. And then Kyle starts ruthlessly questioning these Arab passengers as to why they were watching her from across her hotel window in Berlin. And you actually see that very, very early on in the film too. These that what look like the same two Arab guys, but they're kind of just obscured in shadow. It's hard to say. Um, especially when the Arabs give their whereabouts of where they were the night that her that Kyle and Julia were at the hotel. they're both confused as hell, and one even feels threatened, like some racial prejudice is being made against him. And this even fires up the attention of a nameless male passenger who, oddly enough, looks like Kevin James, and begins lashing out against the Arab. Um, yeah, even if it's not entirely for Kyle's benefit or defense. So that is everything up through the first hour and 4 minutes into the film. And then for the next 2 minutes after that, this story completely flips a 180 and reality becomes totally warped. Totally. I mean, even I find myself getting pulled into the vortex of Kyle's world and emphasizing with her paranoia. It turns out that Carson, despite being an air marshal, is also using his authority for evil. It turns out he and a flight attendant named Stephanie are both responsible for kidnapping Julia. So this now begins to reveal a plot within a plot. Although the intentions of Carson are somewhat vague, shady, and shrouded in mystery, it's clear that he's controlling reality behind the scenes, convincing the passengers, the flight attendants, and even the pilot that there was never a little girl on the plane. But that was just the first act. The second act, which happens at an hour and 4 minutes in, is that Kyle, according to Carson, is a terrorist who smuggled explosives in her husband's coffin, and that she plans to blow up the plane unless she has $30 million wired to her account. It turns out that the coroner in Berlin was also part of the terrorist operation as well. But the passengers aren't even really being held hostage. It's just Kyle, but she doesn't even know it yet. She's slowly putting the pieces of the puzzle together, though. She does see through the other side of the veil, and she knows her daughter is still on the plane. And then, an hour and 6 minutes in, it turns out that, this is where the gaslighting plot device is used here, because Carson is actually deflecting off of who he really is, that he's the hijacker, but nobody knows, except that Kyle is got like an intuition that it's him. I mean, he certainly knows that the flight attendant, the flight attendant Stephanie was up to something as well when probing her about why she wasn't checking avionics. Um, and of course, this is the point where, yes, we finally discover that Julia is being held in avionics at the very, very front of the plane, and that Carson has been hiding explosives inside the coffin of Kyle's dead husband, and that Carson is the one who's going to blow up the plane, but is going to make it appear like she did it. And I obviously can leave the rest of the movie blank at this point because you probably know how the story is going to end at this point. Um, it's, I mean, it does become on the nose. Um, but that's okay because like the entire build up is just so intricately designed. This film really does a great job in tackling the subject of grief. The subject of grief is handled in a very exhilarating way in this film. Exploring how one woman takes reality apart and puts it back together again. And this, the death of her husband, and being overprotective of Julia because she feels that she's being watched and that she keeps saying that Julia has been through something terrible, although it's never really shown what it is. But Julia even admits that she's scared to like leave the hotel, and that at the beginning of the film, and that Kyle has to hide her underneath her coat as she walks her out to the car. Um, while also trying to keep things lighthearted, like her daughter asking her, "What's the food like, back home, where Grandma and Grandpa are? Is there toast?" And then, there's something about grief that can drive you to do crazy things. But, such actions are justified if it means being able to increase awareness of associations between certain memories. And only then does the truth dawn on you and motivate you to take action. The 2016 movie The Girl on the Train is a lot like that too. I just watched that movie a few days ago. Learning to decipher the codes and pull back the veil behind the lies and the false narratives that people create that cause the death of a loved one, which spurred the grief in the first place, until grief ultimately becomes an ascending pathway towards a higher perspective, and um, more expanded wisdom. Right on. So that's my review for Flightplan. Yeah, this is my third time watching this movie. I don't really know if I would consider it Jodie Foster's best outing, but it's definitely one of her higher quality roles. Honestly, I don't think I've ever seen a bad Jodie Foster movie, to be honest. But yeah, uh, highly recommended. Very, very layered movie. It's a film that I feel really, really benefits from multiple viewings. And every time, at least for me, every time I watch it, it really does feel like I'm just discovering a new level to this house, to use a metaphor here. Like, it's like there's a basement, there's like the main level of the house, then there's the basement, then there's like a secret cellar in the basement, and then there's like an underground tunnel. Honestly, it's like I'm just seeing new facets opening up that I feel just goes to show how rich this story construction is. So, yeah, definitely gets my 5-star IMDb rating right there. And I will see you next time. Integrating real perspective.